Good morning, everyone. If you would grab a Bible, let's turn to Joshua chapter 2. Joshua 2. We'll be spending our time in this part of the Bible this morning, Joshua chapter 2. It is so good to see you and be with you. I want to say Happy Mother's Day to all our mothers. We are so thankful that you are our mothers, and we're thankful for the work you do for those who have children that are a little older, or if you are here and you're thinking about your own mother. I hope that if you have the opportunity, you'll say some kind words of appreciation to your mom. And always we want to be thankful for the work that our mothers do as they sort of bring the kingdom to their children, as many of us have had that experience being raised by faithful, God-fearing moms. I do want to say, though, I don't have one of those Mother's Day sermons today. You know, the one that's like an acronym that spells out motherhood and maybe all the points rhyme or something like that. I don't have anything like that. So if you're looking for that, I'm sorry, but I hope you'll bear with me because we're just going to talk about the Bible for a few minutes this morning. We're going to read in Joshua 2, and we're going to talk about the story that's found here. I think it's a story that you'll find interesting, and particularly I hope you'll find it relevant as we make some applications of the things that we read here to our lives today. Joshua chapter 2 and verse 1. It says, "And Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, 'Go view the land, especially Jericho.' And they went and came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and lodged there." So our scene here is Joshua is the new leader of Israel after Moses has died. The people have come out of Egyptian slavery, and because of their disobedience, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and now they have come to the cusp of the land of Canaan. And just across the Jordan River is Jericho. They come across, and they are about to go into the land. You're familiar with this part of Israel's history. You've seen this before, where we send spies into the land to see what it's like, see if we are going to be able to take this land. But you see, the last time we did this, the spies came back with a bad report. They said their cities are walled and fortified. We're like grasshoppers in their eyes. They're huge, we're small. They're numerous, we're small. We won't be able to do it. And so that became the point of disaster. But this time, it's sort of a disaster again, because these spies are going to go in to spy out the land, and they're not going to find out anything. You say, before they can even spy out the land, they're going to be found out, and they're going to have to run away just with their lives. But the last sentence in verse 1, where it says they came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, that's going to have some amazing implications, because their choice and where they're going to stay will lead to their salvation and the salvation of Rahab and her family, and a place in the line of Jesus, and a successful conquest of Canaan. All that's going to happen because they happen to go to her house. And I want to share that story with you for a few minutes this morning. I want to talk about the story of a prostitute's faith and the glory of God. Now I want to tell you this story because it's a story of second chances, where Israel gets a second chance to go spy out the land and go believe in the God who's going to try to give them the land. And it's also a story of the second chance of Rahab, who has these immoral lifestyles that then are changed as she places her faith in God. I want to share that because we are people of the second chance. We all need second chances. And we have come to Jesus because he has offered us a second chance to do what we failed to do as we tried to obey God and do right the first time. I want to share that story because it's a story of faith in surprising places, which reminds us of the power of our God to produce faith in all kinds of people, even people that we wouldn't ordinarily pick. And I want to share that story because it reminds us of God's proclivity for the weak and the polluted and the desperate people, that he can then take and reveal his glory in them. So I want us to see this story for a few minutes. Let's just begin by reading the story. I especially want to do this because it's possible that there's some who are not very familiar with this story, or if you are familiar with it, you've forgotten some of the details since it's been a while since you last looked at it. So let's just read, beginning in verse 1. It says, "Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, 'Go view the land, especially Jericho.' And they went and came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. And it was told to the king of Jericho, 'Behold, men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land.' Then the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, 'Bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land.' But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said, 'True, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And when the gate was about to be closed at dark, the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them. But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them with the stalks of flax that she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued after them on the way to the Jordan as far as the fords, and the gate was shut as soon as the pursuers had gone out. I hope you see this is almost like a Hollywood-like story, where there's all this intrigue and suspense, what's going to happen, and then at the last moment, the author reveals that she had actually hidden the spies and then redirects the troops go to a different way. Verse 8, before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you also will deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and brother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. And the men said to her, our life for yours, even to death. If you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was built into the city wall, so that she lived in the wall. And she said to them, go into the hills, or the pursuers will encounter you, and hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Then afterward you may go your way. The men said to her, we will be guiltless with respect to this oath of yours that you have made us swear. Behold, when we come into the land, you shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and you shall gather into your house your father and your mother, your brothers, and all your father's household. Then if anyone goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be guiltless. But if a hand is laid on anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be guiltless with respect to your oath that you have made us swear. And she said, according to your words, so be it. And she sent them away, and they departed. And she tied the scarlet cord in the window. They departed and went into the hills, and remained there 3 days until the pursuers returned. And the pursuers searched all along the way and found nothing. Then the two men returned. They came down from the hills and passed over, and came to Joshua the son of Nun, and they told him all that had happened to them. And they said also to Joshua, truly, the Lord has given all the land into our hands, and also all the inhabitants of the land melt away because of us. So let's start by just breaking down this story a little bit. I want to talk first about the fact that Rahab hides the spies. Look in verse 1. It says in verse 1, Joshua the son of Nun sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, go view the land, especially Jericho. And they went and came into the house of a prostitute, whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. Now, the first thing I want to say in verse 1 is that there's no indication that there's any kind of physical relationship between the spies and Rahab. There's a lot of speculation about that. I don't think there's any indication in the wording in the Hebrew. Now, some scholars surmise that a harlot's house or a prostitute's house might be a kind of hostel or inn with some other types of things that go on in it, but just sort of a place for travelers to stay. And it seems to me they may be onto something, because one detail you might notice in the story is that as soon as they come, the king of Jericho immediately knows that they're there. That's the next verse. In verse 2, it says, and it was told to the king of Jericho. Wonder how he found that out. Well, probably this is something like an inn where word spreads quickly. So verse 2, it was told the king of Jericho, behold, men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land. And the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land. So the king immediately sends someone to come seize these spies. But I want you to notice it's not a quiet, unknown matter, just happening over here in a corner where Rahab happens to have these men. She doesn't really understand what's happening, and it doesn't seem to be a big deal to her as much as it turns out to be later. No, this is obvious to everyone that there is a problem. Now the king knows, and the king has sent troops to get these men. And if she doesn't report these men to the king, then she's committing treason against her own country. So the stakes are high. Verse 4. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said, true, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And when the gate was about to be closed at dark, the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them. So we learned Rahab had already hidden the men here, and we also will learn more about why in the next few verses. But she obviously knows where they are from. We're going to find that out. So verse 4, where she says, I didn't know where they came from, is just a lie. And then verse 5 is also a lie, along with a misdirection. She does know where they are. She does know where they went, because they're on the roof. So I don't think we can get around the fact that she is lying in these verses. Verse 6, but she had brought them up to the roof and hid them with the stalks of flax that she had lain in order on the roof. So the men pursued after them on the way to the Jordan as far as the fords, and the gate was shut as soon as the pursuers had gone out. So she had hidden them on the roof, it says, among drying stalks of flax. I had to look that up because I've never seen drying stalks of flax. There you got some pictures of flax. You can see some of them are very tall. Of course, you cut them in different ways, used to make linen and yarn and things like that. But this, you can see how if you got a bunch of these and you put them on a roof, it would be easy to hide men between them or under them. Especially you can see how there's some growing flax, and then here there's some cut flax that's beginning to dry. So you can see how there would be a need for that, and it makes sense that it would fit. But that just helped my mental picture of the story. So, by the way, Rahab sounds like a pretty enterprising woman, doesn't she? She's got a lot of irons in the fire. She's got her own business, her own house, and here she's, doing the things with the flax. Whatever more business stuff is going to happen with that, she seems to have a lot going on. So they believe her. I mean, why wouldn't you believe her? What would she have to gain from hiding these men? So they say immediately, so she redirects them, hey, you should go, and they go and they lock the city behind them. The gates are shut so that everybody's shut in. They don't want the spies to come back into the city because they think they've gone out. They're going to go find them outside. I want to stress that Rahab did not have to hide the spies. She could easily have just let them take them. They're right in there. Would have been easy for her. She probably would have gotten a pat on the back. There is only one reason why she would hide them, because she thinks they know something or are going to do something that will be in her best interest to be on the right side of. All right, well, let's talk for a minute about this. It's kind of the elephant in the room in the text, right? Which is, there's a lot of discussion about Rahab's lies. And people will take this example and ask the question, does Rahab lying about the spies mean it's okay for us to lie in certain situations? And that's especially an important question because there are some texts in the New Testament that praise Rahab and say a lot of good things about her, and we'll talk about those a little later in the lesson. I'm just going to say, I don't think that's a very fruitful conversation. I don't think it helps us a lot to talk about, is it okay to lie in certain situations? For one, I don't believe that this text is here so that we can moralize about what we do in this specific situation. I don't think that's what he's saying. Here, if you ever have some spies from a foreign nation who belongs to God and they come to your house and you hide them and people ask your questions about them, that this is what you do. I don't think that's the reason the text is here. So it seems to me an incidental part of the story rather than a focus. For example, we know that the Old Testament and the New both describe lying as sin. The person who wrote this obviously knew that, and yet there is no addressing that whole problem. It's not a feature of the story. It's just something that shows this is how she did what she was doing to stick her neck out. So I believe what we're intended to take from this, and we'll talk more about this in a minute, is about Rahab's faith, demonstrated by her willingness to stick her neck out. I don't believe that this is intended to be a moral lesson about whether we should lie or not. So I'm going with this. The Bible consistently condemns lying, but it does not here condemn Rahab for her lies. So it praises her faith. My admonition is, let's just focus where the biblical record actually focuses. Let's put our attention there. So she hides the spies. Then Rahab declares her faith. We learn more about this. We don't know why yet she's done what she's done, and it's sort of an open question at this point in the story. Verse 8, before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted. and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. So the first thing she says in verse 9 is, I know that Yahweh has given you the land. And that must have shocked them, the spies, when they hear this. In fact, I wonder how many Israelites would have said that. That I know that Yahweh has given us the land. I don't think they're sure. And yet here is a pagan woman, a Canaanite, who is sure. She says, yes, I know this, that he has given you the land. And Rahab boldly declares it, and we know she believes it because she's just risked her life because of that truth. Yes, I believe that God has given you the land. She also tells them about the reports that the people of Jericho have heard about Israel. She tells them, we heard what happened at the Red Sea, which, by the way, is over 40 years ago. That's old news. But we heard. And we heard what you did not so far away, not so long ago, to Sihon and Og, the kings on the other side of the Jordan. We have heard who you are and what you're doing, and we are terrified. We know that you're now going to march over the Jordan, and you're going to come to Jericho, and we are not going to be able to stand against you. So we have heard, she says, and our hearts melted. There was no spirit. The fear of you has fallen on us. Now, isn't that a different conversation than the last time the spies came back? When they said, oh, we're like grasshoppers in their eyes. They're so big, we're so small. Here, they're afraid of us. They're terrified of us. So she recounts their history, and she even makes a statement. I don't know if you caught it in verse 11. In verse 11, where she says, Yahweh, your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. God is in heavens and earth. That's a statement from Deuteronomy echoed in her speech. That God is a God of more than just a territory. He is a God of the universe. The heavens and the earth are the way ancient peoples would describe the entire universe. He is a God of all. Yes, Rahab is a prostitute. But we get a sense here of what motivates her. Why is she acting the way she's acting? She knows what's about to happen. She knows her options, and she knows the best I can do is to save myself and my family. So while Rahab did not have to do this, her faith compelled her, and here she declares her faith. Because there are some things that if you believe them, they have to change how you act. And they do for Rahab. And so then Rahab asks to be spared. Verse 12, now then, please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you will also deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and my brother, and father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. So she says, I've done you a favor. Here's what I want. I want you to save me when this inevitably happens. Give me a sure sign, she says. And they, in verse 14, agree, we'll do that. You don't tell on us, and we'll save you, and we'll save your family. So she lets them down through a rope in the window. I've got a little scarlet sash there in the window, her window in the wall. By the way, I just love the symbolism of this picture. It reminds me so much of the Passover and the blood of the Lamb. How there is blood, scarlet on the doorposts, and so the judgment of God doesn't come to that house. And here is Rahab and her house, and there is a scarlet cord that identifies this is one we're saving. Judgment of God not coming to this house. Scarlet cord, the blood of the Lamb, saved from the wrath of God. And so Rahab acts in faith, and she declares her faith, and she seeks to be saved from the judgment of God. And that is exactly what happens. We're not going to go into this part of the story, but when the siege of Jericho comes in chapter 6, Rahab and her family, everyone who's in the house, is saved just as they had promised. But I've been spending some time this week thinking about the question, why is this story in the Bible? And I want to ask that question because I think there is a series of things we're intended to learn. And I want you to think with me about why this would be here. Obviously, I've already kind of pointed out, I don't think the point here is that Rahab teaches us when it's okay to lie. I don't think that's the idea. So why is it here? What is it intended to teach? And what if you were an ancient Jew reading this, or an ancient Jew in the Israelite nation waiting for these spies to come back, and you heard this story about Rahab, what would it tell you? How would you feel? I want you to think about that with me for a minute, because not only does it impact them, but I think a lot of these thoughts move forward to today. First, it shows that God is with Israel. God is with them. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of the lesson that we're in the moment where we're transitioning from Moses to Joshua. Think about how rocky that would be. Transitions can be hard because where we trusted and knew someone really well, now you've got a new guy in charge. How is he going to do? Turn back a page to Joshua 1. So in Israel, Moses was the one who led the whole nation. Yeah, there were leaders of clans and families and tribes, but Moses was really the first to be the capital L leader of Israel. And so I want you to read this with me. Joshua 1 and verse 1, it says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving to them, to the people of Israel. Verse 5, he says, no man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you. God is going to bless Joshua's leadership. He says, just like he blessed Moses. Now, Joshua's going to have a different kind of work. It's going to be a bloody work. He's got a conquest to go through, but he will be with them. I will be with you. So if you're an Israelite, you hear that and you're like, well, that's good, but you still got some anxieties, some concerns. What is Joshua going to do when those situations get tough? Moses had a lot of experience. He lived to be an old man. And now we've got this younger guy, this new guy. How's he going to handle it? And then you hear this story about sending spies in. Maybe you even said, I don't know if we should send spies in. That didn't go well last time. But when you hear those spies go in, what they find is the one person there to not only tell them, we know that Yahweh has given you the land, but also to say, come stay with me. I'll save you as long as you spare me when the time comes. There are people in the nations they're going to conquer who are already giving up and who are already honoring God. So you see maybe a path forward, that God is with his people even now, and God will provide for you even now. So what I want to say here is, this reminds us that the story of Israel is not the story of one man. It's the story of God's people, and God's always going to be with his people, even though the generations change and people come and go. Even though leaders change and transitions happen, that God is with his people. And I will say that's important for us today as well. I'm thinking about leaders among God's people today, leaders in churches like this local church, where we have had a number of different men who have led us. We've even had different men who have come and preached here, occupied this pulpit. The thing with leaders, though, is that we're all human, which means, for one, sometimes we do good things and sometimes we do mistaken things. And for two, we're all human, which means we're all temporary. And there'll be times when other people will come and fill the shoes that we have right now. So when that happens, what we need to remember is that the constant in all of this is not a certain man or a certain group of men. The constant in this is God. God is with his people. And that those transitions can be gone through successfully because the work of God is not dependent on any man. It is God's work. God is with his people. Second, God's greatness speaks for itself. God's greatness speaks for itself. I want you to look again in chapter 2 and verse 9. Chapter 2 and verse 9, Rahab says, I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you, for we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea. We've already heard. We have heard what your God has done. We have heard. We have heard. We were convinced before you ever got here. We didn't look at your army and say, oh no, we already heard, and we were convinced. Rahab didn't need the spies to preach to her. Do you notice the spies say nothing in our narrative to convince her of anything? She's already convinced. She already believes. It's not that they come and give her the gospel. She has already heard what we could call the gospel in that form. So I want you to think about this idea that the report of God and his people goes before them. This happens a lot in Joshua, where wherever they go next, wherever the army goes, the people there are already hearing about and usually terrified of the advancing army of Israel. But I want you to remember that the Old Testament has this a lot as part of the function of God's people. God's people are going to spread his word so that people will hear about and know about God because of them. I'll give you a couple of examples. This is Deuteronomy 4:6. Moses says, keep them, talking about the commandments of God. Keep them and do them, for that will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples, who when they hear all these statutes will say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. Now notice, you might take that last phrase and say, oh, they're just going to be really impressed. What a cool nation. But he says, no, they're going to hear what you're hearing. They'll hear all these statutes. They'll hear God's word because they'll hear that's how you're living. One of my favorite examples of this is 1 Kings 8. This is when Solomon is dedicating the temple, and he prays this amazing prayer. He says, likewise, when a foreigner who is not of your people Israel comes from a far country for your name's sake, for they shall hear of your great name and your mighty hand and of your outstretched arm, when he comes and prays toward this house, here in heaven your dwelling place, and do according to all for which the foreigner calls to you, in order that all the peoples of the earth may know your name and fear you, as do your people Israel, and that they may know that this house that I have built is called by your name. I want you to notice in that quotation how they will hear of your great name and come. This is not, we're going to go out and teach them all. God's greatness speaks for itself. People hear it and are drawn to it. The prophets do this over and over again, where they talk about how the Gentiles will come to Jerusalem and hear about God and learn from God. The Queen of Sheba comes to hear because she says, I've heard about Solomon's greatness, but I want to see it for myself. And so God's greatness, as revealed in sometimes his people and their behavior, sometimes in the majesty of what God gives them, draws people to him. So when we see Rahab, I hope you see what I see. What I see is God's greatness has already gone before them, so that now the people are just following behind their God. There are people in Jericho who are in awe of God, in awe of his power. There are people in Jericho who are desperate and hungry for something new in their lives. There are people in Jericho who are scared of what's ahead and seeking a refuge. There are people in Jericho who have already discovered God. And that happens before the spies even get there. Matt talked about this in his class this morning at Mars Hill in Acts 17, where the people are already passionate and stirred up, looking for something because they're dissatisfied with what they're receiving in paganism in the New Testament era. And when they hear about God, it triggers something. God's greatness speaks for itself. So let me just make the application quickly. In terms of Christianity, it should never, ever surprise us when people are moving toward God, even though they haven't heard the gospel yet. When people are seeking and groping for God, when people are wondering about their lives, when people are asking questions, maybe even seeking us out, because they hear about a God who cares about them, who orders the world, who makes sense of life, who gives them a purpose, and they say, I want that. I want that. This is God already at work. And it may be that at that moment, we step in and we help them connect the dots, or maybe we help unpack some of the things that they've heard before, or maybe we have to undo some things that Christians have said that weren't right. But whatever it is, we are just the man or woman on the ground where God's already been, just like Rahab. Sometimes we sing a song where we say, we're the only Bible the careless world will read. And we say things like, God has no hands but our hands. I have to tell you, I'm not super comfortable with the song. God has lots of hands besides our hand. God's already at work. And it may be that I agree with the principle of the song that, yeah, we don't need to shut our mouths and we don't need to forget our obligations to help those around us. But God's work's going to continue whether I do it or not, because God is God. And so when I read this story, I see the power of God and the greatness of God already spread. And our job is just to go in and help bring in the harvest, not to do that work ourselves. Third, what are we intended to learn here? Obviously, that God will accept Gentiles who believe. There is just no question that God accepts Rahab on the basis of her faith, and he spares her life, and he welcomes her into his people. This is Joshua 6:25, a little later when we talk about the siege of Jericho. But Rahab the prostitute and her father's household and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved alive, and she has lived in Israel to this day because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Isn't that amazing? She becomes a part of the people of God. She already believes like they believe. And I mean, after all, where's she going to live? This is now Israelite territory, so she just stays with them. But more than that, in Matthew 1, when we read about the genealogy of Jesus, it says Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David the king. So not only that, we see that Rahab marries and becomes a mom, the mother of Boaz, who we know from the biblical book of Ruth. Isn't that fascinating? She was a prostitute, evidently unmarried. And now she not only becomes a part of the people of God, but part of a family, and such a family. She is in the line of David, the king, and all those kings of Judah. And then, of course, ultimately in the line of Jesus, which is the reason she continues to be sort of immortal in her fame. But it is the unique style of faith that Rahab has that the New Testament author sees on. This is Hebrews 11:31. It says, by faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. You know, she was going to die if she didn't find a way out. And yet she does, by faith, save those spies. And then James 2:25 that Daniel read for us this morning, in the same way was not also Rahab the prostitute justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out by another way. So it wasn't just a faith where she said, yes, I now believe that. Probably a lot of people in Jericho just believed, said, you know, well, I think that we're probably going to lose this war. But she did something. She acted, and so her works saved her. Her works justified her. So even in the Old Testament, God was willing to overlook racial differences and to wipe away moral failings when people believed in him and obeyed. And in a similar way, God now accepts all people who will believe in him and act out of that faith, although now that faith is directed toward Jesus, his son, as Messiah. And I also want to remind you that we talk about Rahab, and sometimes, even in the biblical record, it calls her what? Rahab the harlot, Rahab the prostitute. But that's not her identity anymore. You see how God changed that? Yes, that was what she had done. That was her past. It would always be a part of her story, but that's not who she is anymore. Now she is a hero of faith. Now she's one of the people of God. Now she is a part of God's plan to bring the Messiah into the world. God changed her story because of her faith. I hope you hear the parallels. This is what happens with us. You can't change your past. You can't undo what you've done, but God can take it and redeem it and make it into something that becomes beautiful, just like he did with Rahab. And the last thing that I think we're intended to learn here is that God will achieve this conquest himself. Just like when we started, I can't help but zoom out a little bit. The spies go into the land to view the land, but they don't view the land. They want to gather information, but they don't gather information. One scholar said, the spies do no reconnaissance, and they do not return with any strategically useful information. I think that's pretty clear from the text. They basically get busted the first day. The only thing that changes is that at the end of chapter 2, they are convinced that God has given them the land. That's the only thing that changes. But guess what? It doesn't affect the invasion at all, does it? Because we're not going to take Jericho by spying. We don't find the weaknesses and get some turncoats and things like that. No, we're going to march around the city in this weird pattern, and then the walls are going to fall down, and we're going to go in and take it over. Because God is saying, I have got this. No exotic battle plans. Sometimes God saves intentionally in these ways that emphasize our weakness and our inability. David says this when he is about to take down Goliath with just his slingshot. He says that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. So let me tell you why that matters to us. We obey God, and we try to keep his word, and we put our faith in him. But at the end of the day, it is God who does the work, and God who gets the glory for all that we achieve and all that we become. It's God's work. He will do it. Salvation, blessing, joy, relationship, hope. The battle is the Lord's. We are just glad to be on his team. I told you in the beginning, Rahab's story is one of second chances. Her life is redeemed by her faith in this moment. Don't we need second chances? It might be that you're feeling that this morning. And I want you to hear the good news of this story, that wherever you are, this can be a moment where a new opportunity and a new direction begins. This can be that moment. It was for Rahab, where she recognized now is the time for me to change something and to step out in faith. Rahab's story shows us faith in surprising places, that God is at work in far more ways than we can pin down. Can I just ask, rather than despairing about the state of our country, what if we started looking for the places where God is working today? He's still at work. Rahab's story also reminds us of God's penchant for taking weak, polluted, desperate people and revealing his glory in them. So my question is, what about you? Might be that you, at this moment, are ready to make a change in your life and step toward your God. And we want to encourage you to do that in any way we can. If you're ready to become a disciple of Jesus and to be forgiven of your sins, washed in his blood, cleansed and made whole, ready to walk in a new way, we'd love to help you do that this morning. If you have something wrong in your life that you want us to help you with, whether that's through praying together or some action plan we need to devise, please let us know about that. Whatever